Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're joining us from around the world. Welcome to Web3 Warriors, episode 109, featuring Zoe Osborne, an amazing 3D spatial designer with Mahogany design Commune and a creator of beautiful 3D NFTs. Welcome, Zoe. How are you doing today?
Thank you so much. I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing amazing. You're joining us from Toronto, I believe.
Yes, I am in Toronto right now.
Awesome. All right. Well, welcome everybody to Web3 Warriors. I'm your host, David Krome. I go by Krome in the metaverse. And today, with episode 109, we are marking the start of season 6, which is really exciting and really looking forward to more conversations about the creator economy on the blockchain and the impact that Web3 is making for creators, entrepreneurs, and really builders around the world. And thank you to all of our listeners and all of the feedback over the many seasons and many episodes that we've had. It's been very rewarding experience, and I know that there are people taking nuggets of education and inspiration out of this show, and so that's what keeps us going. So thank you everyone for tuning in and continuing to push us forward. So with that, for today's episode, for episode 109, we're going to be really exploring the metaverse, a favorite topic of ours, going back to the first episode. And I've often spoken about how, as a gamer, as somebody who has spent a lot of time in the digital space, as it were, it wasn't until I realized how, bringing digital assets on chain onto the blockchain creates a whole new economic structure for the gaming world, and the ability to really tokenize digital assets and pay with real world money through crypto, of course, for actual assets and items that you have in the digital world, which can be space, it can be architecture, buildings, it can be your clothes that you're wearing, and of course, even the avatar that you're walking around as yourself. So that kind of blew my mind when I realized how, crypto and the blockchain was making that economy much more possible and much more open to everybody. And so we've talked to a lot of people in the Web3 gaming space. We've also talked to a lot of advocates for kind of the digital space and the metaverse, as it were. So today we're going to be really looking at kind of the design and the aesthetic of the metaverse. And Zoe has a lot of experience in this space and in this conversation. And so as the kind of evolution of the metaverse continues, you have to imagine that the design and the immersive kind of quality of the space is going to matter that much more, right? So on the screen right now, we actually have one of our corners of the metaverse with Web3 Warriors, where you can visit at web3warriors.io. Now, this is run by On Cyber. They actually have these pre-created 3D fabricated places where you can throw up your NFTs and kind of create a gallery out of it. So this one's got like a really cool kind of retro gamer vibe, which fits with the Web3 Warriors brand. And you can go there and see all of our NFTs that we've collected under Web3 Warriors on the walls, supporting a lot of artists around the world. So that's just one example of kind of a use case and how the 3D design really changes things, because you can see, there's ping pong tables and a pool table and an old retro Atari and Super Nintendo, and just having those little digital assets designed to make it look more realistic and kind of set a whole vibe for the 3D space makes a big difference, right? So with that, we're going to definitely have that conversation. But, Zoe also comes with some experience talking to government officials in Barbados, which is a really cool conversation as well. I should also mention we connected at Blockchain Futurist Conference in Toronto, which is where I learned a bit about her story at a very cool panel discussion where we had a lot of interesting conversations about the impact of Web3 in the Black community, specifically in the Black diaspora around the world, and the ability to really empower ourselves and empower really anybody, of course, who embraces the technology, but build as a collective and build the future that we want to see, essentially. So it was a really great conversation, and thank you, Zoe, for that, and everybody else who was on the panel. It was really amazing. But I'm very fascinated with the conversations that you've had with the Barbados government, and what your kind of sense are when it comes to developing nations like those in the Caribbean embracing the technology and really making the most out of it. So with that, I'll stop there and maybe turn it over to Zoe. Thank you again for joining us. Maybe before we dive into all the technical questions and look at your amazing NFTs, can you just share a little bit about what brought you to Web3 and what brought you to 3D spatial design? And thanks again for joining.
Thank you so much. So really and truly, my journey into Web3 started through COVID. I was curating an exhibition for the company that I started, Mahogany Culture, which focuses on Caribbean artists and I wasn't able to have the exhibition in person and COVID was just starting. I was like, okay, why don't I use my design skills because I have a background in interior design. I was like, why don't I use my design skills to create a virtual space and like place the artwork there? And from that, I just like animated it out. So it was a video walkthrough experience. And like from that, I got a lot of feedback from other people saying, hey, like your work, it would work really well with like NFTs. And I had no idea what NFTs were, but people were just telling me that it would make sense. And then a fellow artist, Alex Gibson from Barbados, like gave me my first like zero point 0.1 Ethereum to be able to mint my work, and the rest is history.
Nice, nice.
Yeah.
So when you were creating those initial digital spaces, what were you using to kind of create that, and what inspired you to create, digital immersive spaces even before really understanding kind of the Web3 or NFT conversation?
Yeah, I guess like what inspired me would have been the need for it, the fact that we couldn't like go
Okay.
to a physical space. In terms of what I used, I would have used like what I was most comfortable, and I still do use these programs today. So I started with SketchUp, and then I would have went to Lumion, which is a program that if you're like in the architecture or urban design space or interior design space, like it's a program that a lot of people use for visualization. So therefore, like the output for that is like a video or an image. So I naturally decided a walkthrough video would make the most sense to get the idea of like being within the space. So I would have done that before understanding the different platforms that I could then like bring that even further into the metaverse. But yeah, that's where I started.
That's pretty cool. And so would this have been a space where you could actually like create an avatar and walk around in it, and like you could host multiple people, or was it just more of like a video kind of showing the space?
So the first one would have been a video showing the space, but then it was curated into an exhibition on Arium pretty early on, which was like one of the first experiences I had where you had the avatars and like having my artwork there and being able to talk to people all over the world about my work at that time. I was like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. And then from then I like used that platform to then take my exhibition to the next level of like having like gatherings while showcasing the art.
Nice, nice. That's pretty awesome. Tell us a little bit about the Mahogany Design Commune and your inspiration behind that, and what your kind of maybe mission and vision is there.
So Mahogany Design Commune is an extension of Mahogany culture, and the idea of that is it's a Caribbean history and cultural collective, and it's focused on creating a space that feels at home. So within my artwork, as well as like the Mahogany culture, I try to make sure that people from the Caribbean, but also anyone that resonates with any of the imagery I create, like they have this feeling of like nostalgia, being home. I also suffer a lot from like homesickness, living in Toronto, being from Barbados and growing up there. So like everything within my work and everything I do is this idea of like how do you create something that like pulls from a culture, whether it be the colors, textures, elements, but it still creates a experience that's a bit sometimes like revolutionary in terms of the technology or just different because it's representing the people that really connect with it.
Very cool. And is there like a, because it's got commune in there, is there a collective? Is there a community aspect that you're really kind of emphasizing there? Or is it just kind of hoping to build into more of a collective?
It's a mixture. So I
Yeah.
have like with projects that I've had included other artists, mainly from like Barbados or the Caribbean. But right now it's still me, it's just me. But the idea is that yeah, like with every project I can be able to bring in different people from different skill sets and also backgrounds to bring the projects to life.
Nice, nice, very cool. I'm looking at this one, Grand's bedroom. It definitely looks like it's got sentimental value there, and it's got definitely some wood grain. And I don't know if that'd be mahogany, but definitely a whole vibe there. It's very cool. Maybe just tell us a little bit about what inspires your NFTs. I've noticed there's a lot of combination of kind of nature and architecture, and sometimes juxtaposed. But yeah, just really curious about the other inspirations. Definitely the Caribbean culture comes through, and wanting to kind of highlight a little bit of that homesickness, which I think any Caribbean person in Canada feels anytime it's cold, right? But yeah, just tell us a little bit more about the inspirations behind your work. And yeah, this piece just looks really beautiful, and so well done. But yeah, I'd love to hear about it.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, the mahogany, yeah, that's a big thing. The mahogany culture has to do with the idea of a lot of the furniture is mahogany. So one of the initial things in my pieces is that I'm looking at a lot of the furniture that's like in my house that I grew up. So incorporating the texture and sometimes like showing it realistic or showing it in a very surreal way with the colors. And that kind of comes from driving around with like my mom and my grandmother on Sundays and looking at houses, looking at the different colors of the houses, the different styles, but also then always seeing these houses that are being like overgrown by nature.
Mm.
And sometimes it's like I'm capturing a photo or it's just like a visual like memory that I'll be capturing, but it's just this idea of like that relationship between how these trees and bugs and everything just like overgrows these houses, but then they're still coexisting together. It's something that I enjoy, although it is a bit annoying when I think I'm like living in the house and then a lizard like comes inside in my bedroom. But
Yeah. So I thought this was just like an artistic expression, but this is like a real setting that you've seen with like inside the house. There's all kinds of like grass and bugs and everything. It looks beautiful as an art piece. I'm looking at this other one, Woodhavens, and it's yeah, it's just really cool. A front room with a bunch of grass and a bunch of butterflies flying around. So this is something that is somewhat common, I guess, like certain more rundown houses, or is it like people that live in the houses and just have like a grassy area in it? I have actually been to Barbados once, but I don't
yeah.
recall seeing quite the overgrown houses.
Not to the extent in which I do it. It's still very surreal. Like I still take my artistic license to an extent, but I think it's also the feeling because the one thing I always remember is there was at one point I was living at home and it was just me in the house, and my mom was telling me that if you don't use the house, like nature will kind of overgrow it. So it's just like you need to make sure to like open all the windows, get the sunlight in because I was getting like lots of grasshoppers. It just really felt like nature was encroaching into it, and even the wooden floors because of the way how the houses are constructed. Sometimes if there was like a hole in the floor, I would like see below, and I'm like, wait, there's like grass just below here. So there's that element, and then yeah, there are some houses like in the country that are like dilapidated, and then you just see like the trees and everything like starting to grow throughout them. So it's a mixture of like it being real, but also me kind of really pulling it and using the conceptual element of it as well.
I love it. I love it. It's really amazing. And congratulations on all the sales and collectors. It's really cool to see. How have you found kind of the economy of it, or the collector base? And do you find that, you know, you're getting a lot of support and buy-in from the Caribbean community and people who kind of resonate with the type of art that you're putting out? Or yeah, how do you feel about kind of the global possibilities of a collector base, but then, like you say, being very clear in the vision of like replicating or showing the Caribbean culture? So how has that worked with your collectors?
It's been really great, to be honest. I must say I'm very grateful for all of my collectors. My first collector and the first person that bid it on my first work would have been both Caribbean artists, Alex Gibson, as I mentioned, and Leek Mall in the end, like collected it. And then I would have had like Nicholas Sassoon and like Eggshells that also collected my work. And it was great to see a lot of people like when I would tweet out about different works, them like respond, this reminds me of like the house at my grandmother's house. And sometimes it was in the Caribbean, but sometimes it wasn't. But there was like this, I don't know, there's an appreciation for like what I was showcasing and the culture of it, but also how it could then be included in other people's memories. And I remember one time there was a collector, they were technically anonymous, but then they sent me an email or a message and they were like, oh, I've been to Barbados and this like reminds me exactly of what the experience was. Thank you so much. And that was just really heartwarming to know that it was also not just capturing like my memory and people that have lived there, but also people that would have like visited and then they have like a piece of it that they can always keep.
Yeah, 100%. Definitely. Some of these buildings do remind me of my brief visit to Barbados as well. It's pretty cool. So the collector base is there. How do you feel about kind of the future of these 3D immersive spaces? And it sounds like you're very much focused on kind of the art of it and not necessarily doing as much of like building out actual metaverse spaces for people to walk around in and doing that. But I assume, as someone who's made such beautiful 3D architecture, you must hear from people in the metaverse who are like, hey, could you build something like this for me to like walk around in at my metaverse corner here? So how are you feeling about kind of that conversation, and have you really gotten active in the metaverse yet, or still kind of just exploring?
Yeah, like I have built on Spatial, I have like played around with creating spaces. I think in terms of the nature, one of the things that I'm working on, just in terms of a technical standpoint, is like how to really get that feeling of like the nature and the sun. The elements that I really like about my work, like into the metaverse, understanding that like how heavy some of the systems are. But yeah, there are some companies that I owe and I owe like my artwork. Like I need to curate some artwork and place it on the platform. So it's definitely something that one I want to do. I'm passionate about. Um, it's when the time's right. But
No doubt, no doubt.
it's yeah, it's a mixture of both for sure. Like my head is definitely like between both, just showcasing it as the image or video, as well as people being able to be fully immersed in it.
Very cool. And so you do have people reaching out to you though, as far as doing some like 3D architecture building in their metaverse space. Have you having those conversations?
Yes, I have. I have created also some metaverse spaces for exhibition, like for exhibition spaces.
Cool.
So that's been pretty fun, where either reimagining the artist's work into not just like showcasing the image of their work, but then like creating 3D spaces based on like the concept of like what their artwork has been. So those are like some of the most, I guess, like exciting projects that I've worked on in the past.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I do want to ask you about this Breezin one. It seems a little more conceptual and it's a cool kind of floaty thing. I'm just curious what the inspiration behind it is and what kind of what you're going for with the different kind of expressions. There's like a floaty thing that, anyway, I'll let you explain it while we have it up on the screen here. It's very cool.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, breezing, the idea is that they're like inflatable breeze blocks. So in my work, like I always, one of the elements I look at is the breeze blocks that you find in the Caribbean. And I wanted to trace, like on the research side, like how those symbols can be traced to West African Adrinka symbols.
Oh,
So with that, like with this project, I looked at some of the existing styles of breeze blocks that I've seen in Barbados, but also looked at some of the symbols and tried to see how they could work as breeze blocks. And then with that, I also just wanted to have fun with it. Um, like I do like inflatable objects and objects that kind of look like gummy bears and colorful
yeah.
things.
It does
But
look
it is
edible
a bit,
kind of.
yeah, that's I like really like the idea of looking at artwork and you thinking that like it's either a toy or it's like very edible. So I really just wanted to like play with that while still having reference to like something within the culture. And even the kite on the background too is I actually built that kite while I was in Barbados. So the kite that my cousin and I would have constructed was like in the side, and I just kept looking at it and using the measurements to like recreate this kite that we would like try to fly during Easter. Mind you, it didn't really fly because there wasn't much wind. But the whole point is that that was also like a nod to like the culture, and maybe like the breeze block is holding down the kite, and it's just like out
Nice.
there.
I dig it. I dig it. So I had a personal connection for you as well. It's very cool.
Yeah.
Sold a few
Yeah.
of them. There's a couple available. Everyone check it out on foundation.app. Look up Zoe Osborne. Got some amazing, amazing artwork there. Really. Congratulations again. Continuing to push things forward. So how are you kind of feeling about the NFT space in 2024? How are you leaning on it fairly heavily? Is it something where you think that I don't know? When did you start? Sorry, in 2022 or 2021?
2021,
Yeah.
pretty really 2021.
Right. So you saw the crazy hype and the real explosion, right? And do you think that kind of the NFT demand is ever going to reach that kind of peak of like, you know, FOMO or whatever you want to call it? But there was a lot of attention to it, right? And it definitely has quieted down in the last, especially the last year. But even into 2023, really, it started to get pretty quiet. How are you viewing the marketplace, and what do you think about kind of where we go from here?
Yeah, I guess for me, because NFTs was kind of the way for me to feel a bit validated, to be honest, as an artist, to say, people like this work, like I'll continue creating like what comes to my mind. And then seeing that dip kind of also made me, I guess, like not as inspired. Because even if I wasn't creating the work like just to sell, there was something exciting about, I guess, like the energy around like when you're like creating work and selling, and also on like Twitter, like everyone's having these conversations around it. So the change has really, I don't know, for lack of a better word, made me a bit sad. But at the same time, I'm still hopeful. But I think it's hard to understand just because of the fact that it also will be tied to the economy in general because of the fact that it's using cryptocurrency. But in terms of an artist standpoint, I think that it really does make a lot of sense to have sorry, I have there's like an air show going on in Toronto right now, so I'm not sure if it's
No problem.
offsetting
I didn't
audio.
quite notice it.
Okay, okay, that's good to know. So I think that in terms of like showcasing your work on like digital frames, and being able to like have it connected to your wallet and showing that okay, you've purchased this digital element and then it's in your home, like I think that that's really strong and it makes so much sense. And I think that if that is more of the push, especially with like galleries, in the art world, then it would have more of a boom. But I don't know, with different conversations, depending on what city I'm in, I do understand that not everyone has a full understanding of that. So with that, like I'm unsure, but I think that if that was a driving factor, or that was the main conversation, then I think that it would really be in a different position than it is right now.
Yeah, it feels like the real art collection revolution. It was like a short window in the beginning of 2021 where that was like the primary focus, and then Bored Apes came and other PFPs came, and it just began to be more of a almost like a gambling thing, like let's buy into this project and hope it goes to the moon, da 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 da. And that became the narrative, like NFTs are great for earning wealth and making quick flips and becoming a millionaire overnight, which is not realistic. And it obviously kind of crowded out the art conversation, right? And personally, I've definitely got so much more value, both kind of socially, making friends, and also even monetarily by collecting actual art. And you can put it up at a much higher price, and if someone agrees with that price and they're willing to buy it at that price, then that's great, and if not, that's fine. But it's not like I buy something with the express hope that I'm going to be able to sell it for 10x, within a year or something crazy like that, which was definitely the mentality of kind of the space in 2021, 22. So maybe it's good that it's kind of getting shaken loose a little bit. And to your point, I have seen, actually, when I was in Toronto, we went to an after party at this guy's condo, which was ridiculous, like top floor of some crazy high, like right with a beautiful view of the CN Tower. It was probably the nicest condo I've ever been in. But he had exactly what you're describing with his NFTs. He had a Bored Ape and a punk, proudly in his digital display. And I won't lie, I was kind of jelly, especially the crypto punk. I'm not as into the Bored Apes these days, but the crypto punk's always going to be OG, And so it was really cool to see that kind of use case and someone proudly displaying, their one-of-one art in a digital frame in their condo. And I do think that that's not going to go away. And we're seeing there's still demand, right? Like you're still selling NFTs. We have other people selling NFTs. It's not like the market is completely dried up. And when you look at those who are selling, it generally is from an art perspective, right? Like I don't think the PFP hype seems to have moved to Solana, frankly, in a lot of ways. I think that there is a real art conversation happening. So to your point, hopefully putting that digital art on your walls and having that conversation and knowing that you have, the individual piece or the limited edition piece based on your blockchain code, that's the future, right? So hopefully that's taking off for sure. I am curious, you mentioned you designed in Spatial a little bit. How are you feeling about the evolution on that side with the metaverse, right? So similarly to the NFTs, there was a lot of hype 2021, 22. We had Zuckerberg change the name of his company to try to take over the metaverse, right? And there seems to have died down as well. And how do you feel as a 3D designer about that kind of economy and that demand? And do you think that that kind of metaverse space is going to be, more in demand in the near future, or is it kind of going to be like it is right now with like a very niche crowd of gamers and 3D builders and some NFT enthusiasts still involved in it, but definitely not as like all encompassing, and this like digital world is taking over kind of narrative? How do you feel about that as a 3D designer?
Yeah, I really love that question. It's something that I've been thinking about. I don't know if I have like a conclusion to my thoughts, but I think that even myself, like I see myself gravitating to, okay, going out more and like having more in-person experiences. And I think that, I guess it will, I think it, like what you said, it's more of a niche thing. So if somebody is into gaming or is into the idea of like metaverse spaces, and maybe they're like bringing their friends into that space, and then within that group, like that's something that's happening. But I find like bringing people that don't necessarily have devices that support a lot of the metaverse space. I know that Spatial has the option that you can like use it on your phone, but even then, depending on the phone that you're using, like it can be very clunky. And that's one thing that I've been very cognizant, like when facilitating events and people that are like new to those spaces and like what their experience is. So with that, I look at some people and I think, okay, maybe for them, like it doesn't seem to make sense, or it's not what they're comfortable using, but there is then a side of the world where it does make sense. I also think like having those IRL metaverse experiences are something that, at least where we're at right now, we're introducing people into the metaverse in ways that then it makes sense to them, or where they can like really fully experience something that it's so crazy because they're going to somewhere that's completely opposite to where they are physically. Is very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And I think only from like the response to that will we, I guess, really understand whether or not people will want to continue to have those experiences within their own home, or is it something that it's just always a social thing where you're out at a party, a concert, in a retail setting, and then you're having these like new spaces or third or fourth spaces that you're experiencing.
I love that. I love that. It's kind of about like meeting people where they are, essentially, right? Shout out to Metadre. He's one of my friends in New York City. He's kind of got a bit of that concept going on where it's, there's a live event, right? Maybe it's a music event, maybe it's a gaming event, whatever the case might be. And then the metaverse just happens to be there. And people who can't actually be there in the physical, can join in the metaverse and see the party happening and actually kind of remotely take part in some way or another. And obviously, the event planner has the ability to say, how much involvement the metaverse attendees might have. Maybe they get a free NFT. Maybe they can, actually choose songs that the DJ plays or things like that. Like there's little things they can actually, do to take part in the event. But I love what you're saying about maybe just make it like an extra kind of element to events, right? And actually meet people where they are. And as people get more interested and they want to join and they know that they have this option to join remotely in the metaverse, maybe that's how it takes off, right? But it's cool as a designer that you're kind of thinking about that, because there are a lot of different kind of avenues that it could go. So it's really interesting. I want to give a shout out to Dr. Jane Thomason, who we had way back on episode 42, and she's been a very big advocate of the metaverse, and she described the metaverse as a kind of always on 3D immersive environment. And when she was thinking about it, or when she was talking about it from that perspective, she was actually mentioning how governments, especially in like Southeast Asia, Dubai, are actually embracing the metaverse as a way to provide public services kind of around the clock. So maybe we can use this to kind of segue to the Barbados conversation and what you've seen or what you've heard from kind of government officials there. But do you see that idea of like basically whether it's governments or businesses embracing kind of the 3D world as a space where their customers or their citizens in some cases can just go in there and get services any time of the day? How have you kind of looked at that concept, and are you going to be involved maybe building some spaces like that out?
That was definitely something that was on the pipeline for Barbados. I'm not privy to like the decisions of like what if it will still happen and what's going with it. But yeah, I do. It's nice to see that like government officials are in tune, understanding, and also interested in like facilitating people in that way. And yeah, I guess there's always like different reasons as to why things don't necessarily work, whether it be in terms of cost or depending on like what's allowed in different countries in terms of technology. But it's something that I'm passionate about, and it's something that I think would be great to see more of. But yeah,
Awesome.
can't
So
really say much on that.
tell us a little bit about your advocacy in Barbados, and maybe a little backstory, if there's a story there, about how you were able to, maybe bend the ears of some ministers or government officials to kind of advocate for Web3, advocate for the metaverse, and what their responses were. I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, so I had the privilege of curating one of like the first, or definitely in Barbados, the first like NFT exhibition there. And with that, I had also created once again, there was a metaverse, and then there was also a video of the exhibition within the metaverse. So it was multiple layers
Nice.
to like the spaces you created. And then it was created during the TDC conference, or maybe the UNCTAD conference. I think it was in 2021 or 22, if I'm not mistaken. And we actually invited the Prime Minister of Barbados, as well as other government officials that were attending the conference, to come and see the metaverse space. At that point, because I didn't have screens there, I had QR codes that then would like link to each artwork. And then there was also the metaverse space on display. And it was really great that the Prime Minister was able to come. And it definitely had the conversation about the fact that from the exhibition that you can see how talented and diverse all of the artists were, and there were Barbadian artists as well as artists across the Caribbean and in the diaspora.
Nice.
But the issue is that only a select few of the artists were able to then see the money, I guess like in their own currency, because of the fact that it's not that accessible to be able to like convert your Ethereum, say, into Barbados dollars, for example, like in Barbados.
Mhm.
So that was just like one of the conversations that we were having, is that it's really great. It's great to see the creativity. The creativity always exists, but if it doesn't make sense, it's not sustainable, then like what does that do for the artist? Because I didn't I would have had like a lot of interviews at that point talking about my NFC journey, and that would have come out in Barbados. And I didn't want to be a representation of something that's not possible for people that are living there.
Mm.
So I always made sure to like have that conversation.
Yeah, no doubt. So when you say it's not possible, you just kind of have to have the right knowledge, or there really was like no platform that could help you off ramp from crypto into the local currency. Like, was Coinbase active in Barbados? Is there any crypto.com? Nothing. And is that a
Um,
regulatory issue, or is it just these companies not even looking at Barbados?
it's a regulatory issue. There's an issue with like even with PayPal that you can't convert from say like Canadian, you can't pay a Barbadian PayPal account.
Hmm. Wow.
So like even converting certain things were kind of tough. I know that there were some artists that found like very interesting loophole ways around it, but then even with those things, it was like, okay, just take your money out right away because I'm not sure if this is like very trustworthy. There was also the option of converting to Bitcoin, but for me, um, I don't like in terms of like the value of the money, then by converting it, I guess in the end it would still be the same, but it didn't seem like the most viable route either.
Hmm.
So there were like one or two ways that some people were able to circumvent the system, but honestly, it was still very tough. And
Wow.
that's to be able to receive, but to even to buy into like get I have access to the to crypto, that was almost impossible
Wow, really?
initially. I
Yeah,
mean, it definitely opened up,
that's
but
kind of
yeah,
sad. Because I know
yeah.
like the U.S. dollar is pretty popular, right, in the Caribbean in general, and Barbados specifically is kind of a fairly popular form of currency. And so you'd think at least going into the U.S. dollar maybe would be an option, but I guess it's the platforms themselves and just not having kind of the payment rails, right, to actually go, from crypto into any fiat, even U.S. dollar. And so when you had that conversation, you got the prime minister at your event. Congrats, that's pretty epic. But like, how are regulators responding to that? And has anything changed over the last 3 years? Are you in talks with anybody in Barbados? Has it become at all easier to obtain crypto, sell crypto?
My understanding is that it has become easier to an extent in terms of like what the government plan is. It's definitely, I think because of the change in crypto, I think the urgency, at least from for what I'm privy to. So if I don't know what's happening behind the scenes, I will say. But in terms of on my side, I wonder if it's because of the change in crypto, or sorry, the NFC world, if maybe the urgency to like facilitate these things has kind of gone down. But yeah, things have opened up to a extent. I know that other Caribbean islands too are like looking to have ways to have like their own currencies. But in terms of a utopian way of yes, this is how I sell my work, like it's still something that if an artist comes and says, "Oh, well, I want to sell NFTs," it's a conversation of, okay, I also believe that you should, but I'm also going to let you know that these are the potential issues that you'll have in terms of being able to immediately get the money that you're selling. And it's kind of like, okay, do you want to do this? And then over time, you know that you will be able to convert it, or like, is
And
it
do you
not worth
think
it
there's
at
a
all for
business
you?
opportunity there for someone like you, situated in Canada, with an easy well, I would say easy, off on or off ramp option, right? So they have crypto wallet, you have crypto wallet. They can obviously send peer to peer, no problem, if they want to send you the funds and they trust you to then off ramp to a local currency and then send them the currency over Remitly or Web2, money transfer app essentially. Is that something that you can see? Obviously, you're gonna, between all the different transactions, there's going to be a little bit of a reduction in the money, and then maybe you charge a small fee to make that worth it for yourself because it might add up over time. But I feel like, wherever there's a gap, there's a business opportunity, right? And I would hope, some enterprising Bayesian or anyone in the Caribbean would actually take on that gap and really, try to solve for it. Because I imagine there's got to be, something. I'm really surprised if Coinbase doesn't have an option in the Caribbean, whether Jamaica or Barbados. But yeah, there's got to be a solution there. I just feel like that's asking for some enterprising entrepreneur to create that solution and, create some value for themselves and for the artists in the space.
Um, Yes, I agree. That's like a really good business thing, especially for the artists, because I know that people now are like able to like invest in Ethereum and they found ways to I'm assuming then convert it. But in terms of even like helping to facilitate the artists and like kind of hold them to like explain the full process in terms of the NFTs, yes, you're right. with the gap, there's a business opportunity. And maybe there is someone out there doing it that I'm not sure of. But yes, you're right. If there's not, then
Cool,
yes,
cool.
it
And
needs to
the
happen.
artist conversation, when you were initially planning this first NFT gallery for Barbados or showcase in Barbados, what was the conversation like when it comes to talking to the artists, and kind of did it take a lot of convincing for them to mint their art on chain? Obviously there's a financial component to that. It sounds like maybe you got some support to make that accessible for people, and so they're not, you know, having to worry about the difficulty of creating their first wallet, or at least funding their first wallet. What was that like, the actual activity of onboarding these artists from Barbados and the Caribbean?
Yeah, it was definitely a lot of conversations because everyone was coming saying like, well, what is an NFT? How does it work? And then also in terms of the artists, that there was always a conversation about artists that were mainly creating physical artworks, paintings, like a lot of the traditional styles.
Mhm.
Like how does then it work for them? Like, do they have to now create something that's digital, or can they like keep artwork, like retain the style of their own artwork within an NFT token? So there's a lot of conversations around that and like the ideas of how you can use an NFT to make it work for yourself. And then I think there was definitely a level of trust. So I'm also really grateful for the artists that I've worked with. I mean, some of them were already in the NFT space that I would have found, and the ones that were not, that were able to mint their work, there was a level of trust. And then, yes, me able to, I kind of, because of the way how I started with Alex Gibson gifting me my first Ethereum, I really had this idea of like, this is the way that you do it. And you know, you facilitate the artist and just keep it going. So that was also like part of the ethos.
That's amazing. And so do you explore other blockchains at all either, or has it always been kind of with Ethereum for the most part? Are you looking at Solana, Tezos, or how are you exploring that conversation? Multi-chain, single chain?
Definitely use Tezos. I use Tezos as something that, in terms of, you talked about the different artistic styles that I use, and that has like an even different style. I kind of almost feel as though it's a sketch. Like I tell myself it's kind of like sketch versions of my work.
Hmm.
I still do love the style, and it's a bit different, but I also use Tezos, not as much recently. I do kind of gravitate towards Ethereum just because it's like what I started, and I still have, I don't know, emotional connection to it. But
That's cool.
um, yeah.
And I noticed that you had a one piece on super rare, as well as the most of them seem to be on foundation. Are you using like a custom contract, like maybe through a manifold.xyz or anything else, and then they land on foundation, or how are you minting your NFTs for the most part?
I definitely do a mixture. So I've used Manifold one to try it out the first time, and then I did really like the fact of feeling so I had full agency over my work. So I sometimes use Manifold, but sometimes I also mint straight onto foundation. Once again, I don't know if I make the decisions based, I make them off of nostalgia and emotion. So sometimes I'm like, oh yes, I remember the days. So I just want to mint something straight on foundation today.
True artist. You're not too concerned about the financial, you know, sovereignty argument, right? You just want to put your art out there wherever works, wherever's convenient. Shout out to Foundation, though. I think they're doing a lot of things right, and I don't actually know the difference between minting on their platform versus using the custom contract. I can assume, you know, it's probably similar to using like the OpenSea platform or Super Rare, where they do have a little bit more exclusivity, and maybe they take a little bit more of a chunk out of the sales when you sell. I'm not too sure. But your Manifold experience is good. And what was it like with Super Rare?
Super Rare was a good experience as well. It was one of those things where it was one, I'm not sure how you can get onto Super Rare now, but it definitely was something where I would have been invited because of an exhibition that I was part of, a Black Rare. But yeah, so that was a good experience. But creating the work on Super Rare, I really do look at it as, okay, what is something that is very specific to like my art style, and it's like my best art piece that I'm gonna put out there just because of the way how I was introduced onto the platform. So I guess that's one of the things. So I consider like what type of work I'm creating, and then which platform I want to place it on. Um, so yeah, I guess I enjoy all of them, and Super has also been a good experience. Yeah.
Yeah, so this Sunday afternoon at Grand's house is the one on Super Rare that I'm seeing here. And the way that the sun sets is really, really cool. And I know you mentioned how when you're building in Spatial and some of these 3D spaces, it's the real like environment that's difficult to kind of manipulate or have it kind of work in the artistic kind of aesthetic that you're going for. Can you just speak a little bit to like your use of lighting and the way that you've kind of, I mean, to people who build in 3D, it's probably not that complicated, but to me, it just really looks awesome the way it kind of subtly, the sun is rising and then sunsets. But just curious about your kind of use of lighting and why it gets difficult when you're really building like immersive spaces.
Yeah. Well, I guess depending on the platform I'm using, I either am like recreating something that feels like the way how the light affects buildings in Barbados. But if I'm using, say, like Lumion, you can actually choose exactly your geolocation. So I'll always make sure to put in my coordinates to Barbados, and then
Wow.
I'll be looking at, yeah, like the
That's
time
cool.
of
I didn't even know
day.
there was a 3D builder that could do that. That's like it
Yeah.
emulates an actual location anywhere on the planet.
Yeah, and then it will
Wow.
affect then like daylight saving, and like you have to look into the time coordinates and everything,
Wow.
because it'll affect how long and short the shadows are. So I try to with that like recreate what it would feel like, and then also because of the location of my house, um, in terms of the relationship between the building and like east and west, I try to a lot of the times in my work like recreate that feeling as well. And I just really love the sun setting, the sun rising. So those are also like the favorite times of day that I like to use. And then just like in terms of how that translates, I mean with like Blender, for instance, you can recreate something similar to that as well with like the right tinting of the angles and the lighting. But I'm sure with like different skill sets, it wouldn't matter as much, but for me, it just feels a little bit different.
What you're used to.
So yeah.
And the fidelity on the plants is really something. So is that still Lumio or like, because like you mentioned, right, if you're using Unity, for example, I don't think you're going to be able to get kind of that level of detail on the plants, right? Maybe an Unreal Engine would be able to perhaps mimic something like that. Can you speak a little bit to that and like the idea of duplicating nature, which I do think ups the immersive value like so much, right? When you're in a space, in a 3D space, and the grass actually looks like grass and the trees look like real trees, that's, you know, a whole different vibe. So what are you using to build that, and how have you kind of experienced that in maybe a Unity or one of these other kind of SDK builders?
Yeah, so once again, because I would have started with Lumion, then that's where like most of the realistic, like very hyper realistic pieces you will see.
Mm.
Over time I've started to like build my own like flowers and like nature as well. So I then like include that within the spaces. And then like as I'm then like creating it in Blender to then export to Unity, for instance. One, I guess there's also the mesh consideration, and then like as you're like reducing the mesh and like the hyper realisticness of each item like becomes different, or just like the style of it becomes different.
Mm.
One thing that I'm playing around too is just like using different materials so that the feel is a bit different, but it still gives that general feeling. But um once again, it's just it's not the same across platforms. I guess, with Unreal Engine, I guess exporting that to OpenGL, you would still have like an ability to have more of that like full nature feel. But yeah, for me, it's always like everything's a bit different. Each rendering program as well like has a different feel or output that at least I'm able to create, whether I'm exporting, say, Lumion versus Blender, it still always feels different. So depending, I think it'll just be to, I guess, develop a style for like a metaverse feel that still has the nature, but it just looks a bit different. And that's just my personal, I guess, like artist journey to like develop.
Oh, it's amazing. Like I've not seen many pieces or anything in the metaverse that has this level of kind of accurate detail on plants specifically. It's really impressive. I didn't really know, like, maybe in some Unreal Engine, like high fidelity stuff, but that's harder to mint, right? How do you handle that conversation around like file size and that, right? When you're dealing with 3D and you're dealing with especially high fidelity 3D, you know, you're getting into pretty high file sizes. Ethereum is pretty good for being able to handle, you know, and you got Zora and you got some that are okay with higher, you know, larger files, but is that something you're cognizant of, and how do you manage to, you know, reduce it as much as possible? Because they all seem to load fairly quickly, considering the quality of the 3D. So yeah, just curious how you're handling that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I had to really like work that out, tinker it a little bit. I realized that the higher output and then condensing it actually turned out to be better than like rendering it a bit smaller resolution.
Mm.
So I kind of like got a bit of a workflow with that, and also the timing. So then usually most of my my animations are 30 seconds, because the longer it gets, then the
Yeah,
higher the
adds
file
up quite a
size. So I
bit, right?
realized,
Yeah,
that's like the sweet spot. Like 30 seconds
that's
is the
amazing.
best to keep it. Yeah.
Cool. So when you're talking to other artists and, you know, kind of advocating for NFTs in Web3, is there a specific kind of onboarding style that you use? Is there a kind of go-to, like I guess when you were pulling a lot of those artists into the Web3 space, was there something that you advocated for above other things as far as like what 1, 2, 3 steps to follow when kind of bringing your art onto the blockchain?
Yeah, so I kind of really followed how Alex Gibson and I keep mentioning them because they really did. They're a big part of my journey, but how
That's
they
awesome.
onboarded me, which was an email with a whole bunch of links and saying, I can tell you, but read through these things first and then we have a conversation. So with that, I realized, yeah, it is really important for even if you're telling someone to let them read certain things themselves. And at that time, Foundation had like some pretty good documents on like what is an NFT and like how to mint your work. So I always look to the different like existing platforms and what writing they have. So that I'll be speaking in terms of my the way that I can like describe it to them, but I also make sure that they then are learning the language from like different platforms that work. And then honestly, yeah, you also use Foundation a lot to like, oh my gosh, tell artists, okay, you can start with this because I know that it's very user friendly. And yeah, because for me, my as much as I know a lot of artists will use OpenSea first, and it depends on what makes sense for them as well. I just explained like my experience with Foundation has always been like the best. So I'm like, okay, it's a good place, especially how you want to align your artwork. And yeah, that's kind of I guess like
Nice.
my
They've got some
approach.
good
Yeah,
resources there for the newbies. And
they have
you mentioned those that have physical art, right? Whether oil painting, whatever the case might be. Did you kind of go through the ability to just kind of capture that with a high resolution digital camera, and that like nothing additional was needed? How was that conversation had, and were they generally receptive? Like, oh, okay, I can just take a picture and put it online, and it'll be the digital copy of the physical option, and you don't necessarily have to sell the physical with the NFT, right? So how did that
yeah.
conversation go?
I mean, it went as what you said, because I mean,
Yeah,
every artist will have a different feeling towards like how they
right.
feel about their digital artwork and the value of that versus their physical artwork. But yeah, one thing in terms of like understanding how to get high resolution scans is definitely a big thing,
Mhm.
because it's new to some people.
Right.
But then yeah, just like looking at different case studies as well. Like for me, like looking at Krista Kim's the house, Mars house, sorry. Like that was really interesting for me,
Mhm.
like especially because that would have come up before I had started minting my work and like looking at that concept. So if someone has artwork, I like to look at other artists that would have used their style in different ways to then show them here are examples of ways that you can approach it, and then like through discussions and determine like what's best for the person.
Nice. And so, in general, it sounds like it was a mostly positive reception. And do you think that kind of Barbados and the Caribbean are moving in the right direction as far as embracing this Web3? And like you said, there's not as much hype around it. But on the flip side, that's the best time to build and the best time to buy into it, because that's when things are a little bit cheaper. The gas is lower, in Ethereum's case. But even just in general, the crypto is generally a little bit cheaper than it's going to be, when things are kind of crazy and if we get back into a bull market, as it were. So, what's it like, and do you think that things are kind of moving in the right direction?
I think things are definitely moving in the right direction. There's definitely a Caribbean community that is very supportive of the artists that are engaging in the space. I would say that some artists, I think, just understanding the natural, like the life in Web 2 versus Web 3 for them, like it didn't make sense for them to like continue to push their work there, which I understand. So there's also that where you're like onboarding an artist and then because maybe the artwork didn't sell or it just didn't make sense for them, then the art was there. And for those, I definitely try not to push, but I also just, will still always check in, or just by doing like creating my work, then it's like continuing that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's up to each
So
person, like what makes sense for them. And there are some artists, I should say too, that even if they enjoyed understanding about NFTs, they decided like not to go that route like right now.
right.
Um, but yeah, so
So
it's a
on one
mixture.
hand, there's some discouragement because the market is slower and maybe people aren't selling their pieces, but you're kind of softly encouraging them, but also just being an inspiration by continuing to put art on the blockchain, right, and kind of show that there is this opportunity. And to your point, in the end, everyone's got limited bandwidth, right? So you can create the art and work mostly in the IRL and the physical and trying to sell your art just like a traditional artist, but you just have it there, right? If you happen to have some stuff on blockchain that is just potential additional revenue coming in that you don't have to like work overly hard for. Obviously, if you do, attend Web3 spaces and talk about your art more, then you're probably increasing the likelihood of selling it. But it's not like it doesn't have to be a demand on your time, right? And I think that the way you're doing it sounds really cool. And do you exclusively sell in NFTs still and on chain, or are you kind of leaning more into any physical pieces yourself, or just strictly digital still?
Yeah, I definitely recently had some artwork acquired by like Toronto Dominion Bank,
Oh, nice.
and they were like
Congrats.
40 by 60.
That's
Thank you
my
very
bank.
much.
Way
Yeah,
to
I
go,
actually
TD.
yeah, yeah, they're really great in like supporting the artists. And yeah, they purchased two 40 by 60 prints. And it was really interesting to like see my work in that scale, and also like collect like in it like framed also in that scale, and it's something that I've always wanted to do more of, like sell definitely in like the Web2 world. I do have like another print that I solely have as like this is the its main focus is to be consumed in Web2. So yeah, I definitely want to be in between the two, but I'm always considering the value, because to me, like my digital artwork still has like highest value.
Mm,
So I'm always very cognizant of like when I'm selling my work, like the value always has to be retained for that.
nice.
Because I think that's the main thing, because it's essentially digital work.
That's amazing. And what you're doing, getting your art into the physical space, is only increasing your notoriety and your reputation. And so, like you said, it's like you're acknowledging the value you've already created on chain, but you're building on that value in the physical world. So I think like all your collectors are probably super excited to hear about that. And when you're doing the physical pieces, then these are still digital like spaces that are printed in high quality type thing. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Wow.
And they
very
still
cool.
always have the video. So I usually use like Artivive, where you can scan it, you can still see the video
What?
of the artwork.
Really?
Yeah.
So it's like a
Yeah.
moving physical?
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. Which TD is? I want to go see it. Is it downtown Toronto or what?
Yeah, it is downtown Toronto in one of their
Oh,
offices.
snap. Did they tell you how long they're going to hold that for?
I think forever. I mean, they
Let's
have a pretty
go.
extensive collection, so
40 by
of like
60 is pretty huge,
media.
man. Yeah, and that
Yeah,
must
no,
be
it's
kind of
great.
like their main headquarters type of thing too, right? Like, I
I think,
imagine.
yeah.
Yeah,
That's
based in
what I
Toronto.
understand.
I was surprised, honestly, both in New York and when I went to Barbados and in Miami. TDs are everywhere. I didn't even know that. I was like, damn, I can go to my own bank. It was like across the street from my hotel in New York, right by Grand Central Station. I was like, holy, that's cool, Don't have to worry about paying these extra fees for going to other banks. And apparently Canadian banks are just doing all right. They're kind of out there all over the Western world, I guess. But I was not aware of that. So that's kind of cool. Congrats. So yeah, we are going to be winding down here. I know we're kind of hitting that 1 hour mark. I want to respect your time. I am curious, having been in the Barbados side and in Canada and, Toronto specifically, which does have a fairly active Web3 community and NFT community compared to where I am in Winnipeg, where we're just trying to build it out here. How do you feel about the kind of differences, both on the regulatory side? So obviously, I like to think our government across all parties is mostly pro-innovation and kind of exploring it in a real way, and we do have quite a few different options when it comes to accessing crypto and selling the crypto. And you mentioned the kind of pain points when it comes to that in Barbados. Do you think Canada's generally handling kind of that regulation conversation a little bit better, or just how do you feel about that comparison between the two regions?
Definitely think it's a bit better. I do think there was a bit of time in between where I think for a while, like my bank wouldn't allow for me to like connect
The
with.
banks are still being a little bit difficult for sure. Yeah.
But I mean, the thing is, the fact is like it's still possible, so I don't have complaints in that
Yeah.
way. So because you're not much of a complaint, I don't necessarily like think on it much. Because the focus then in that way is like, okay, but like I can't even do this in Barbados.
Right.
But I do still have this idea that like Canada, because of how much they've created, I guess, like the blockchain and a lot of the things that we use on the blockchain, I think that we could be a lot further in terms of the way how we use it and
Mm.
the way how it's celebrated, in terms of, I don't know, like the way the NFTs are like showcased, like how much NFTs are showcased like within the city itself.
Yeah.
So that's definitely like my qualm when I compare it to being in Barbados and then like seeing my artwork showed in like Miami and like different parts of the world. It's like I think my artwork has still been showcased more internationally than it has been
Wow.
like locally in Toronto.
Yeah.
So like that has been a bit
Um,
like my
Tell me about Blockchain Futurist. Did you get art showcased there? What was your experience like at Futurist?
Oh yeah. I mean the conversation panel was really great.
Yeah,
So shout out to
that was
Afro
awesome.
Sankofa for facilitating that.
Yeah, Afro
Um,
Sankofa. That's it.
yeah. But yeah, I didn't have my artwork showcased there. They definitely have like they do have like a gallery here that has like a NFT gallery that's focused on different artists.
Hmm.
But not every artist is showcasing that, so I
I
just
guess so.
wasn't one of them this
Just
year.
seems
But
like
it's
someone in Toronto with amazing, beautiful art that has collectors all around the world. I think they're missing out by not featuring some amazing Zoe art here. So that's kind of,
yeah,
I don't know. I feel like, yeah, to your point, right? Considering Ethereum's born in Ontario, some say Waterloo, some say Toronto, whatever the case might be. It's born in Ontario. It's a Canadian innovation. And I think Toronto as a community, shout out to NFTO and everything they're doing, and a lot of other communities, and Afro Sankova as well, and others that are really pushing the technology forward. There are a lot of opportunities to showcase your art, but at the same time, I think that the art community maybe just hasn't collaborated as much as they could or should. Would that be an accurate statement, you think? Because in the end, it's kind of up to the artists to showcase it. And when you have, showcases at Art Basel in Miami or NFT NYC, and they're making this global call out and you can get featured there, that's awesome. But you want to be featured at home, and you probably have to do that yourselves. I think it sounds like the artists have to take the initiative to kind of make that a reality. Would that be accurate, you think?
I think that's accurate, and I definitely think that. I mean, there's the art world in general, like the Web2 art world and the Web3 art world, and I think that in Toronto, from my experience, there's a bit of stint of like the Web2 art world, like I guess that the approach in Toronto versus my experiences like in other cities when it comes to like Web3 artists. So I think, yeah, like if we came together more the different communities, and also I think like I guess having more screens and access to screens, which I know is definitely a cost as well. Like I
Yeah.
myself would love to like have
Well,
screens that I can make.
with the right setting, you can get the right
Yeah.
sponsors, right? Like I think NFT NYC works with a couple different sponsors, and there are digital frame companies specific to NFTs that would see a lot of value in kind of having their brand promoted at a blockchain futurist or at a larger kind of art Web3 art event, I would think. So that would be the angle I would hope to take for that. But like you say, easier said than done. And when you have those sponsors out there, you would think it's a sure fit, but maybe they don't see it that way for whatever reason. But that's cool. So we need more promotion of the art, and definitely, here in Manitoba, we're launching On-Chain Manitoba. We actually just had our launch event on August 25th, and it's very much focused on trying to celebrate artists and just show artists what the opportunities are in Web3 and on-chain. And I do think that if artists lead that conversation, and collectors of art like myself, I don't fully consider myself an artist, though I try here and there with photography. But yeah, I think between collectors and the artists themselves, pushing things forward is a huge opportunity here, right? So I'm just curious, what are you most excited about kind of this year or into the future? What are you working on? What do you got going around the corner? Obviously, having your art featured at the TD headquarters is pretty amazing. So congrats on that. Anything else you're working on currently or most excited about?
For me, it's just the development in terms of my personal work. I've been doing a lot of research. So I have
Nice.
a residency, a Web2 World residency that I'll be going to Martinique in a few months to like look at the architecture there. So I'm very interested in how that will like affect my work.
Sorry, where?
Um, in Martinique.
Martinique? Where's that?
Yeah, it's like in the Caribbean,
Okay.
close. It's like French
Sorry,
Caribbean.
showing my
So it's like
ignorance.
no, it's okay. There's a whole thing about the English versus French Caribbean, and
Yeah, that's a whole thing, isn't it? Sheesh. I thought the
yeah,
Haitians
but
kicked them out, They still got some land over there.
so it's one of the French Caribbean islands. So they have similar architecture, but also very different. So
Hmm.
I'll be looking at that. So I'm very excited of how that's gonna affect like the work that I create. Um, Other than that, just like I've been pushing with more programs and stuff, and what we discussed in terms of seeing that metaverse with the nature is something that I want to be able to say that I've created by the end of this year. So
Nice. Well,
I'm
let us
I'm putting
know.
it out here so that I have to do it now. So
That's it. That's it. That's what we're all about, trying to
yeah.
inspire conversations, push things forward while having a conversation about how far you've come, right? There's a lot of, I think, nuggets that you've dropped here today, and I'm really grateful for that. And I think that as artists collaborate more and as the art conversation is the main conversation around NFTs, which I believe will inevitably be the conversation. I think the PFP craze, it'll always exist, and I'm sure, you know, people will want to create communities around their NFT art, and that's fine. But the kind of like over kind of hype around gambling essentially in the PFP conversation, I'm hoping dies down. I think it's already died down quite a bit, but as that subsides, the art stays around, right? And the market is there. If you actually look at the on-chain transactions with Ethereum, especially in the NFT space, the art is really kind of killing it right now. So that's my hope, and we'll keep pushing it forward. Is there anything else you want to share before we wrap up here? I'm really grateful for your time, Zoe.
No, that's all good. I just thank you so much for this conversation. The questions have been really great and have me thinking for myself as well. So really
Awesome.
appreciate it.
Well, I hope all of the listeners are equally inspired and maybe thinking about new opportunities as well in the metaverse and in the 3D designing space. And yeah, we'll be live back again in a couple weeks. And until then, we'll catch you all in the metaverse. Thank you, Zoe. Everyone follow Zoe on Foundation at Zoe Osborne. Until next time, catch you in the metaverse. Peace out. Pew, pew.